Sorry, was Live 2 running? Was YouTube running? I didn't even pay attention. Alex.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
There was a bit of a delay there, but it's very busy going up there. My apologies.
Okay. Not a problem. Just making sure that I didn't start too early. Willing to entertain questions. As you can see, in the agenda, there is a link to myself that isn't really myself, as well as a YouTube video if you want to watch that, and then the slides themselves. But we'll go ahead and jump into questions. And Mike, if you're available, would love for you to verbalize your question, as well as tell us how you pronounce your last name, just to make sure I got it correct.
Sure. My last name is pronounced Terhar. My question, I actually don't have the doc up in front of me right now because I'm playing with the children, but the question is around what's the ideal state for the project overview page when people are landing on a project or landing on a group? Like what do you always do when you land on this? And this is more of a general question, not specifically for you, but for the excellent developers that we're hiring here. Because I find that I always land on the page and then I go somewhere else to actually do what I need to do. And our overview page seems to match that of a very popular other offering. And I'm wondering if there's room for improvement there in terms of workflow and discoverability of our other stages and things like that.
Yeah, so I can give you my thoughts, and then if others want to jump in, we can certainly indulge a little bit of time associated with this as other people add questions, though we have a fair number already added in. You know, it's always a hard question of like, when do you change from a format that people are used to? So idiomatic, especially like in writing software, you'll find that different languages have different idiomatic nature. And that's there's kind of that default look that is kind of expected, particularly around open source projects, as it were. But you know, if you were going to ask me what the ideal situation is, I think for most people it would be some level of dashboarding, kind of similar to what you see on a lot of project pages associated with larger projects where they don't actually show it in the code base, right? They have a separate page. So things around what I would consider dashboarding. So you know, like what the activity is associated with the project, what is currently top of list as far as recent commits or highlights that folks want to bring up to keep activity up associated and get people excited about what's going on in the product. How to get started using the product or how to get started developing the product are two areas I could see kind of in that initial introduction and kind of some format associated with that. And maybe you know, some level of statistical analysis of kind of what's going on within the product as well. So I could see kind of similar to like a very dashboard thing, but that's kind of high level kind of thoughts about it. One is like I said, a lot of people are very used to seeing something in a particular format. So we'd actually have to change the world in some ways to think in terms of this, but like that's kind of my kind of gut take, and happy to collaborate with you in the future if you want to kind of take off a follow discussion where I can write down my thoughts associated with it and kind of other folks highlights things, political folks, if anybody wants to verbalize them, be curious to hear.
Great, thanks.
Any software developers have any feedback, or managers? I like the issue list idea, critical issues that we're working on, that kind of thing as well. That seems to be a nice thing to have up front as well. See where the project's going. Cool. Well, if anybody else has ideas, please send them to Mike. It sounds like he's interested in this topic. And like I said, Mike, I'm willing to have a follow-up with you on it to kind of through and come up with some ideas. Go to question number 3. Sid, you're up. Sid, we can't hear you because you're muted.
Sorry, thanks for that. Slide number 3, is this from the handbook, and is it maybe practical to make it a screenshot in the next presentation?
Yeah, I just dropped it in. So that's what it looks like as a screenshot, and is just exactly the wording of it, just reformatted to Google Docs. So I'll change it to a screenshot.
Awesome. And for everyone watching, the context is they want to make sure that people have our work handbook first, and Christopher does that, but to show to everyone it's handbook first, and that you can find this in the handbook and you can just Google this. We're going to use screenshots wherever we can. Next question is, are we empowering individuals who have kids at home to have kind of less output? We're doing super good on our output metrics. So it's normally I'd be like, hey, more output, please. But right now we're seeing that kind of the output is not dipping while a lot of people have kids at home. So I'm wondering whether they feel empowered to, hey, these are special times and it's okay to produce less.
Yeah, good question. So I want to make sure crystal clear on this, or at least as clear as I can be on this. So I believe that we are empowering, first of all, just to answer your question directly, I believe we are empowering people who have complications, not only just with kids, but other family members who are potentially sick, or even people who have care situations that have gotten complicated related to older folks. All those situations, we're trying to empower them to do that. This is the way that I've been kind of articulating is around PTO days, but really what it's about is we measure capacity and results. So if a person is not able to work at full capacity, we really want them to kind of update their PTO. As an example, if they're at 3/4 3/4 capacity, we would essentially say, okay, let's mark off 1 day a week as PTO. Maybe you're working at 3/4 capacity that day, but effectively over the full week you're not, and we really want to avoid burnout associated with that. So the thought process is very much around, okay, think in terms of what your full capacity would be, and then we want to just have the PTO days just so that we can have some semblance of tracking that capacity. Because I think there's the other case, which is we do have some folks who are like, look, I'm holed up, this is what I love to do, I'm going to spend more time right now, and that can be a temporary bump for us. So we're seeing a plus minus anecdotal set of information associated. So it's really hard to tell whether this is a push right now, or if we're getting more productivity because of the crisis, or less, because we're also combating that with it being iterative, right? So we're trying to kind of suss that out a little bit during this period, but we're definitely empowering people if they need to take time that they do that.
And are we seeing that in are we seeing more people putting in PTO days than normal?
I haven't done that analysis, so that's one good thing for me to double check. The one thing I would say is I definitely think we're seeing more of like the single days. I don't think we're seeing the same level of vacations that you would normally see, because people aren't taking vacations, full week vacations. And, that's one thing that I've been personally trying to figure out, and I would encourage everybody to do. I know Eric is talking about taking, I think, a week in May. I'm talking about taking a week probably in May or June. Technically, we still have a vacation in July that we're going to do a hole up in Tennessee, which feels still isolation oriented, assuming we can still rent out the place, and planning to do that. So really encourage everybody to do that as well. I think in terms of if you had to normally take a week of vacation, to still do that. It's just kind of, you got to make sure that it's going to be enjoyable to you.
Yeah, I want to second that. And people are doing it. Eric Johnson is doing it. Scott is doing a staycation. You can even take vacation if you normally wouldn't have taken a vacation. These are stressful times. I can see I'm a bit more on edge than I normally am. I don't have the weekend. It doesn't feel like weekend if you don't go out. So encourage everyone to do a staycation. I'm going to spend some time thinking about that too. Though it is a bit boring to be at home, but at least you don't have to. You can also do non-GitLab stuff and have a bit of a break that way. Cool, thanks for that. Hey, we saw the 30-day plus merge request analysis. I wonder, I didn't have time to read it, but maybe it's fun to walk through it verbally in that call. Oh,
yeah. One thing that I haven't looked at too much of this in detail. This is like literally hot data in regards to, it's been kind of quickly analyzed, and I have a discussion with Mech, Wayne, Kyle, and a couple other folks, Lily, I believe as well, later today around it. So what I remember from glossing over it is just thinking in terms of what we're seeing is like a number of MRs that just go silent for say a month as an example. And we're trying to think about ways to basically bring that to both EMs and IC's attention as well as reviewers' attention. So that's kind of the current thought process is how do we basically eliminate those gaps of time associated with it. Wayne, if you're on the call and you have other things that you want to kind of highlight, you did the analysis, so I'd love for you to verbalize kind of other thoughts around that.
Sure. Yeah, so and it's there's a discussion scheduled where, as a group, a number of us are reviewing it later at 2:30 Eastern. So happy to send an invite to anybody who's interested. And I sent you an invite as optional. Basically, is
Yeah, I have a request. It's super convenient for me, but in this company, we either use UTC or we use Pacific time.
okay. Nope, good point. So 11:30 Pacific. I'm doing my time zone arithmetic correctly. And it's going to be recorded and put on, we're going to put it on Unfiltered and put the link to the recording as well. So, you know, roughly around 4% of merge requests in March took greater than 30 days to merge. You know, the 90th percentile was 120 days, 80th percentile 93. So, you know, there was definitely some at the high end. Some of the observations, about a quarter of them were idle for greater than a month, sometimes one or more times. So they kind of went off people's radar. About a quarter of them had a scope that was possibly too large for one MR, which is very subjective. But also there's a correlation between the number of threads and time to merge. The more threads, the longer it is to merge. And there's some other things on some of the authors, about 40% of the MRs that took greater than 30 days to merge were from about 40 authors out of about 92 total unique authors that had MR of this 4%. And then, so just some draft recommendations is to detect and notify people of when MRs are idle. And there's a couple different ideas around that. A couple ideas on MRs that may have fallen through the cracks. Where they're not idle, but they're just taking a longer time than we want them to, and making folks aware, hey, it's been noticed that they're taking a long time, and maybe we should break them up into smaller pieces, you know, et cetera. And then also some training by team and or author on iteration would be good. And maybe also notification on number of threads. Once the number of threads goes outside a normal range, is advising folks on, you know, what to do to potentially accelerate. So these are just draft recommendations, but that's a first shot at the analysis.
Great. I have time for the call, so I'll join that. And thanks for the summary here. I moved my questions down further below, so we only do them if there's enough time. Eric has the next question.
Yeah. Thanks, Christopher, for the deck. It looks great. On slide 7, I was curious the time scale of that graph. I think it's all MRs like merged into GitLab ever from Periscope, but I'm not sure. Could you clarify?
Sure. That particular graph is actually the month of March. Yes, there are that many MRs in the month of March. There were over 3,000. I think it's the first month over 3,000 MRs. Everybody give a
It's over 3,000.
Everybody give a golf clap. Though, if you go click on the link, you have to filter it to basically get the dates. So you will see over the lifetime of all recorded MRs that's currently encapsulated in the database. Okay,
cool. That makes sense. And then I had a quick follow up on that, which is you can get this graph, almost one that looks, you know, 100% the same inside of GitLab via our productivity analytics feature. And I was curious if you've considered dog fooding that feature.
Yeah, good question. That's actually where I think we got the idea for this graph based on it. The one aspect here is that we are looking at a set of repos. We can't look at everything in the group, and we can't look at, because there's repos outside of the ones that are considered as part of the product. So we have a very specific set associated with this from that perspective. We also include testing software as well, which may be in the repo. I'm trying to think if there's any outside, but like there's a very specific set that we use to kind of do this analysis associated with it. And that's been, as soon as that feature is available in GitLab, we will definitely switch over and then use the feature within the product itself. But that's been the main holdback.
Okay, cool. I'll probably.
And if that feature exists and I'm just unaware of it, then like definitely open to that feedback as well from that perspective.
Yeah. Cool. I'll set up a offline conversation so that you and I can sync on what it would take for dog fooding these graphs.
Incidentally, the graph, the handbook picture, I'm just curious how that comes up. On my page, it comes up with the last 30 days. So the actual handbook reference, I believe, is tightened up to the last 30 days as opposed to the dashboard. So this is another distinction that kind of comes up during that kind of discussion. And we were trying to be handbook first. So any graph that you see in a dashboard that we use also is in the handbook from that perspective. So that's one of the things that we're working on as well. Cool. Thanks for that, Eric. Kenny.
Yeah, and Jean started answering the question. I think my crux of my question is, you list how we've been improving the maintainers in that same slide in slide 6, how we've seen an increase in maintainer to developer ratio, which is awesome. But I'm wondering if that move to domain experts will further increase, or we're already seeing some of the benefit from that. So is it like all going to be upside from here on moving to domain experts, or are we already starting to see some of the benefit of it?
John, you can go first if you want, and I can add some additional color or thoughts.
Yeah, so quick context, we started looking at this a while ago, and we decided to run a pilot during 12.9. The results from the pilot I've linked in, it was fairly positive. One of it being that the review time was reduced drastically, and there was a lot of other benefits to it as well. I will say that a lot of teams have already adopted a process similar to what we are proposing the new default for the code review process is. So I wouldn't say this is going to be a drastic change that's going to cut the mean time to merge down in half. I'd say there might be a good improvement for teams that have kind of like stuck to the default approach of following the review roulette recommendation. But a lot of teams have already indicated when we did the code review survey that they already follow an approach where they assign to people with expertise in a specific area. So I do expect some improvement, but not I don't expect the graphs to drop by 50% or something like that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, here are my thoughts. So one thing that we have recognized is, and this seems pretty straightforward, but when you grow at 150%, it's really hard to keep this consistency. Is that if you have a maintainer within a team, velocity is definitely at a higher rate, because oftentimes that maintainer can help the team effectively get things done more quickly, right? So that's one thing we've tried to definitely do, is push with EMs. In particular around senior engineers within their own teams, to get them on the trainee list and then get them converted to maintainers. Now, as domain expertise comes in, that's over a specific area, that's obviously within a team, and that kind of by definition would help that effort associated with it. You still need an overall general upthrust of having a lower ratio overall, because at the end of the day, there's still reviewer roulette that you have to do for both for some MRs as well as some other considerations around it. So, we have a very solid definition of the definition of done. We really believe, I am a firm believer in code reviews. It's one of the few behaviors that I've seen over my career that's definitely led to the least number of bugs. We want to keep that quality up. So that's the wrestling that we've had to do in the last year, particularly growing at 150%. With the hiring slowdown, we're in a spot where we can definitely continue to increase that or decrease that ratio so that we're in a better spot. But if you say, for instance, had a team that was struggling, if they have a maintainer within that team, you could see a huge uplift from that perspective in efficiency. So you will see localized pockets, though overall, like John said, the overall numbers may not indicate that as easily. So I think there's actually one team, and I can't remember whether it was an ops or CI/CD, but they basically were a fairly new team. They now have a maintainer, and they've seen definitely an upswing because of that.
Christopher, if I may chime in, this might sound a bit controversial, but should the long term for us be sunsetting review roulette and moving to a more domain expertise review mechanism? What are your thoughts on that?
I always like backup process that's not used, but is available in case we get to certain points. And I do worry about if we, for instance, got to back a hiring rate, that we would lose our culture, because pockets of teams would potentially develop. So I'm not necessarily quite of the mindset to remove reviewer roulette at this point, though I would love to see it be used less over time.
I'll just add to that in the code review survey, there was a lot of team members indicating that they like having fresh eyes look at their code, sometimes a perspective outside of their team. And another one was where when the merge request was small or trivial, and it didn't really need a domain expert, having reviewer roulette make a recommendation was very convenient for them. So the idea we have is to enhance reviewer roulette and maybe surface to who domain experts might be for a specific MR, but still give the team member the choice of either choosing to have fresh eyes look at it, or if it's a trivial MR, just load balancing it by assigning it to whoever review roulette recommends.
Cool. We've got a bunch of other questions, and we're at the 5-minute or 4-minute mark, I should say. So I want to see if we can get through some more of them. Sid, you got the next few.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. I love this like graph plus context. It makes everything very easy to consume. So this is super, super helpful.
Sure thing.
In the retro that happened yesterday, I heard of the developers waiting for design that wasn't finished yet. Can we empower people to kind of design later, just ship it out, and then we can improve the design the next time? Like, we accept open source contributions. Not everything has design. Design is super important, but we shouldn't wait for it. Like, waiting is the worst, because now people are not producing.
Yeah, I definitely think if we're absolutely stalled, then absolutely moving forward seems like the right thing to do. I think that's not happening in too many teams. Most teams have plenty to do that's already been designed. So that's something I'll look at and make sure the wording is such that we have that opportunity associated with that. Jackie, you had some additional thoughts?
Yeah, just additional context, since I kind of was involved with this. It's not really considered to be widespread. It was kind of a particular instance. And so to address it, we're just going to be improving how we front load the design work into the very beginning of the milestone, when the engineering work is meant to be done in that same milestone. And I think in general, the front end engineers, I hope they do, and I see that they do in my team, that they feel like they're able to leverage current patterns, the pajamas design system, in order to move forward with something if a design isn't available, or even to propose like, hey, should I do it like this? And then a designer can just take a quick look and say, yeah, go for it. So yeah, I don't think it's a widespread issue.
Cool, thanks for that context, and Christopher, thanks for the possible action.
Cool.
On slide 12, it says, following our new hiring guidance, and it says diversity required, efficient location factor required. That is not hiring guidance, that is sourcing guidance. If someone applies internally, for example, there wouldn't be a hiring requirement for diversity. If it's not if the person doesn't add to our diversity, we're not gonna discriminate on that. So can we make it super, super clear? Because I do not want to have confusion about it being a requirement to get hired.
Yeah, I think we can definitely do that, except for the 2-star rule, which is kind of post-process
That
from
is,
the perspective. But other than that, like, I agree that we can make that clearer from the sourcing perspective.
Two strong yeses. That is certainly hiring guidance, but we shouldn't conflate that with the sourcing guidance. That's also in here.
Cool. Yeah, I'll go back and look at the documentation on that one and get us to better articulate that.
Cool. Thanks. I saw slide 5 had March at a 12 MR rate, but if I look at the graphs in Periscope, it shows 5.6, almost kind of half. Why is that?
Yeah, so if you notice on that particular graph, and I think the one you're referencing, if I share my screen really quickly, is that team member only. So this is an internal team graph that helps our managers basically understand kind of how their team is performing from an authorship perspective. It's super valuable to understand what the team is contributing. So it does include community contributions, It also doesn't include other members of outside of the development organization, as an example, who also contributed to the product. And we really welcome all the contributions, but it's a kind of a way for us to kind of think in terms of what is our actual individual contribution beyond the community and the other aspects. So we measure from an overall perspective, including all the other community contributions, as well as folks internal to the company that help contribute to the product. Those effectively would be considered community contributions. But from a team member, team management perspective, it's great to look at how an individual team is doing. And to be clear, we're not looking at ICs, we're looking at teams specifically, and coaching engineering managers around that performance from that perspective. So we found that super valuable to just kind of be able to zero in on, okay, how is the team performing, while understanding that there's also additional parts and components that we do to the calculation.
I think this is so cool, because this is basically showing that half of what gets shipped is not made by the team that's actually in charge of it and has to produce. Like it's a ton of community and other people contributing.
Yeah, and that's the key aspect, is we want to definitely encourage that. So it's not like we want to discount that from the overall count and how we evaluate ourselves as an organization, but the cut, slicing, and dicing data is super helpful to engineering managers to understand, okay, exactly how is the team doing, and then be held accountable, right?
Yeah, but
expectations with accountability.
Right.
And maybe, again, sorry, yeah, just one additional thought. It's not about what the exact number is, it's about the trend, right? So like, we're not focused on trying to hit a target, a quota, we're trying to see a trend.
What I would suggest is that we also have a graph of kind of that turns this around into a positive thing that says kind of non-team member percentage of merge requests, where we're actually proud that like half of the work is coming from people that are not directly responsible for that code, and viewing it in that way, because I think it's a very impressive statistic that although we've grown so much, that non-directly responsible team members are contributing half of the code, and we should be proud of that.
Cool. Kenny, do you want to verbalize your question?
Sure, I'd love finding your Easter eggs. So will the Athens County Quilt Barn bicycle ride still go on this year?
I need to check with my brother on that. I'm not quite sure, but we'll see. Given everything that's going on in the world, I could see it being canceled or being online. All right. I think we've hit the end of the question list and we're over time. So I want to thank everybody for a great group conversation. Really appreciate everybody's input and feedback, and really appreciate all the hard work of the development team. Thanks, everybody.